Joining us to discuss is Mike Leon, NTD News contributor, policy strategy director for the Free Equal Elections Foundation, as well as the host of Can We Talk? Can We Please Talk podcast. Mike, great to see you. Many are describing last night's debate as civil. What are your initial reactions?
Hey, Kerry, good to see you first and foremost. That's right. Always, can we please talk, everybody, right? So, and can we please talk? They did talk last night. I thought that the interactions were very civil. I saw a lot of people post this debate, posting about how this is the way before 2016, we used to have discourse in American politics, right? There was some compromise and some middle ground about different policy positions. What I loved the most about the debate, Kerry, was really some questions that weren't asked in other debates, specifically around gun control, right? Gun legislation. Both guys are gun owners. Kamala Harris has talked about being a gun owner. I was really happy with that. That question was put on the books about school shootings because there was just one recently in the state of Georgia that kind of got glossed over in this news cycle. Climate change was a question. So I thought it was really well done just from a moderator perspective, the way the conversation flowed, the way they got through topics, the way they were able to find some agreeable positioning on certain things. That's the way American discourse is supposed to happen, everybody.
Yes, indeed, it was very watchable from that perspective, where debates in the past may have been a little bit harder to watch. What met your expectations and what may have surprised you about last night?
Well, really good question, first off, Kerry, because, I had a Republican strategist last night on the show who was formerly Mitt Romney's campaign advisor, formerly Senator Tim Scott. And he said that one of the big things that we've been talking about on NTD and other outlets has been the media strategy of the Harris-Walz campaign not doing enough interviews, whereas J.D. Vance has done a lot of interviews. And I think last night it really showed that J.D. Vance is not only camera savvy, let's call it for lack of a better phrase, but he also, just knows how to participate in this. Governor Walz kind of started out a little bit shaky, but I think he truly found his footing later on, specifically when you got questions around January 6th, specifically things in the state of Minnesota around women's reproductive rights that he has championed. Those are some of my key initial takeaways, that both of them were able to kind of navigate certain issues. I didn't think the moderators interjected too much outside of, you saw, what Luis just put up before about MTG saying that they kind of muted the microphones in one particular instance. But I think the moderators were really separate of this conversation, unlike some of the other debates. And I really got to truly hear about the economic vision of both of them, answering about, the different examinations of each of the policies' economic visions. I heard a lot about immigration being discussed. So we got a lot more answers and a little bit of knowledge of what the top of the ticket is championing as they head to November.
Yes, now let's dig in even deeper, talk offense and defense in the game. What was each candidate's best and worst moment?
Yeah, Kerry, another good question. You're knocking them out of the park here. Listen, I thought, first off, and again, this is the same thing a strategist said to me that we kind of noticed yesterday, was that J.D. Vance was a little bit nicer. Like some of the rhetoric and things that he has said on the campaign trail about Governor Walz, he had a couple of moments where he could have hammered home a little bit more, specifically the answer about Tiananmen Square and the governor's whereabouts there. And by the way, I'm very unfamiliar with that story, but just as an aside, he could have hammered home more about that. And he just chose not to. And then there were certain things where, hey, I know the governor and I are really aligned about this, but this is why I would do it. I thought best answers of the night, I thought, Governor Tim Walz really honed in about Sandy Hook, how that impacted him, being a member of Congress, why he's so passionate about gun legislation, being a gun owner himself, talking about that. I thought J.D. Vance, the same thing is being applied on the Republican side, that Kamala Harris cannot disassociate herself from some of the policy positions of the Biden administration. I thought he hammered some of that stuff home about the economic stuff, asking, are you better off than you were 4 years ago? And that's a common refrain that you hear in all these survey questions. But I think overall, their worst answers, obviously the governor giving his answer about Tiananmen Square and that story. And I thought J.D. Vance, just didn't answer the question right about what happened on January 6th. You can easily say that on January 6th, there wasn't a peaceful transfer of power, and keep it moving. And going forward, we won't do that anymore. And I don't agree with the former president on that. He was already doing that on a bunch of other topics, Kerry. He could have easily have done that on that one.
Yeah, there were hits and misses for sure. You mentioned Tiananmen Square. China was actually mentioned 10 times during the debate. Did you learn anything new about how each candidate views China and how the U.S. should view China over the next 4 years?
That's a really interesting question because I didn't take away a lot from it. Now, again, I'm watching it from a different perspective because I'm also recording a show. I'm getting ready for TV hits. But well, my biggest takeaways, and I know they started with foreign policy, which is the biggest one that I want to hear about, right? Iran launching these missile strikes at Israel, Israel recently attacking, Hezbollah and Lebanon, and all the reporters that I've had on my show and subsequent talking about the Middle East has garnered far more attention. And then you get to economy, immigration. In terms of China, obviously, a global superpower, our trade relationship with them and their aggression towards Taiwan are, I think things that should be emphasized a lot more. We heard it a lot more in the GOP primary debates. I don't think I took away anything last night that really kind of stood in terms of the global positioning that I know how the Trump administration feels about it already, Kerry. I think Donald Trump has made it really clear that he's made us reevaluate our relationship with China. I don't know if I learned too much about what the Harris-Walz position would be in terms of China if they were to take office in January of 2025.
Yeah, it's interesting to note that the debate ended up being censored in China, according to the BBC. Moving on to some of the discourse, Vance mentioned suspicion of the experts and calling for more common sense. What do you make of that?
Kerry, man, I'm telling you, the back-to-back here, because you're in my train of thinking here, because the reason I started Can We Please Talk was really to get back to subject matter experts, right? It's people that are covering it, have covered it, have worked in it, are working on it. And I think for JD Vance to kind of poo-poo the economists that have talked about the economic policies, they have far more knowledge and predictive knowledge about the markets, the trends, where things are going to go. There's a hockey term, you skate to where the puck is going, not to where it is right now. Economists do the same thing when they're, looking at the landscape and the future and predicting markets, right? That's why it's called futures, right, Kerry? So I think I trust more sound economists, because you heard Nora asked a question to Governor Walz about, hey, there's an examination done of your economic policy that would increase the national debt by 1.2 trillion. That's an economist, an independent economist talking about how their policy measures would increase the national debt. He's got to get asked that question, and kudos to CBS News for asking that. But also the Trump administration leaving office, 7.8 more in debt, the national debt, raising the national debt. So I think those are questions that have to be asked, but we have to trust the subject matter experts who are doing the analysis about it, because if we don't, you're turning to people that don't have the subject matter expertise in these issues.
Yes, and I think he was saying 40 years of trusting the experts has led to deportation of things like critical infrastructure, prescription drugs being manufactured in China. So it played certainly both ways. Vance attacked Walz on Harris's economic record. Walz said, hey, we inherited a mismanaged COVID economy. How do you think he handled that?
Yeah. So first of all, another good question, because it is true. Like, right, presidents, and we talked about this last night on our show, like presidents inheriting, right? There was a global pandemic. This is the first time in eons that, you had a global pandemic on our shores, but also globally, and how that impacted trade, immigration, et cetera, and led to legislation that impacted the U.S. southern border. So there was a bunch there that the Biden administration definitely inherited. And I encourage people, as I do in this process, as we should all do, is fact check some of this stuff. And I know last night, JD Vance mentioning the price of consumer goods, take-home pay being the highest under the Trump administration. It's actually increased as well under the Biden-Harris administration. So I would encourage voters, as you continue the process now that early voting has started, when you're watching these debates, make sure that you pinpoint something that you can hone in on and try to fact check it from a reliable source to find out the true information about it, because there are some things that both candidates lied about last night, specifically on the economic front, right? And then there are some things that they told that were truthful. And I think it's tough for the public to discern it in the real-time moment, which is incumbent upon us in these post-analysis shows to really explain where some of these things kind of netted out. There are economic issues that are still happening. Cost of consumer goods are still up year over year. Inflation is down, but it was up during the Biden administration and slowly came down. Whereas during the Trump administration, when he left office, it was around 1.5, 1.6%. Those are just numbers, right? Men lie, women lie, numbers don't carry. And so it's incumbent upon people to learn the statistical information as they make their choices of who they want to vote for in November.
Mike, it was a substantive debate, certainly worth the price of admission. As we finish off, Trump signaled he won't participate in any more debates as voting has already started. What other key milestones now are left that could sway the undecided swing state voters before Election Day, which is now just 48 days from now?
Yeah, I mean, the campaign stops are going to be so pivotal right now, Kerry, because Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Arizona, Georgia, if you've got North Carolina, even too, to a certain extent, if you've got real estate there where the candidates can hang out, they're going to be in your neck of the woods, right? So for the people that are out there that are truly maybe having this, tug of heart in terms of like, well, I've always been a Republican, but I don't know if I want to vote for Kamala Harris, or I don't know if I want to vote for Donald Trump and see 4 more years of the previous administration. It's incumbent upon you to really, truly listen to what they are saying right now, certain things that they'll introduce, learn more about the candidates on their websites. I think last night VP debate may not move much because it's the number 2 job in America, right? They're acting at the behest of the president. So we may not learn more about the policy positions of the overall ticket. It's more of somebody championing what that person at the head of the ticket will do. But it gave us content and positions that need to be discussed in American politics. I have 2 little kids, Kerry, so I'm really excited not excited, but I'm more elated that they talked about gun control and school safety last night on a national stage, because that is something that needs attention. And so I think people need to truly assess these candidates, but the only way you can do that is to listen to more of them, doing interviews. If they're doing campaign stops in your neck of the woods, go visit these campaign stops and these rallies and listen to the information that you want to take down. And remember, all politics is local, state, all the way up and down the ticket. Make sure that you're learning more about these information. And for these campaigns, continue creating that content that will reach different audience types. You've seen Kamala Harris do a couple different interviews on non-traditional sources like All the Smoke, which is 2 NBA players podcast. Donald Trump has gone on Jake Paul and Logan Paul's podcast. So they're doing different non-traditional media, Kerry, which is the right thing to do. Reach voters where they are.
That's right. It's time for voters to do the responsible thing and get informed. Appreciate it. Mike Leon, NTD News contributor, policy strategy director for the Free Equal Elections Foundation, as well as the host of Can We Please Talk podcast. Mike Leon, thank you so much for joining.
Thanks, Gary.